the piercing of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And finally, do you see a man hasty with his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. However, we blithely disregard this. As attorneys, we've been hoodwinked and flattered by our own ease with language, and we've been deceived by the example of a society that treats words like things of little value and of no power, like little objects to be heedlessly thrown about and to be allowed to be floating goalless like dandelion seeds or dust specks. But worse and more foolishly still, we have allowed ourselves to be sucked into the delusion that we somehow own words, that they are subject to our control, that they belong to us. They do our bidding and come when they're called. However, as we all know by now, the only time we have complete control over our words is when we don't say them. Which of us has not already been made painfully aware that saying, "I didn't mean that," will not avail us at all? Once they hit the air or the page, words belong to the reader or the listener and are interpreted according to that person's temperament and temper and/or the temper of the times. This highly charged, landmine-laden area of our lives, communication, is the perfect place to exercise the serpent and the dove stuff. That's what I call the serpent and the dove stuff. For those of you who don't know what that is, the Lord enjoins us to be as wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. That's where we bring our wise action, how we know how to operate in this world. We're with our eyes open, hurting no one, but knowing what the score is. And in this area, perhaps more than any other, we need wisdom. Normally, in my opinion, wise action starts with knowing who's around you and knowing where you are. The first point is obvious. We're communicating, so we're in an exchange. There are people all around us. There are those who are listening to us, those who are reading. There are those who are reading over our shoulders, eavesdroppers, observers, all sorts of people are around us. So we know that we have to think not only about what we're hearing, but what we're saying and who's hearing it. But what might not always be obvious to us is that we're actually communicating in a landscape. We're communicating in a context. So we have to figure out where we are. What does this context and this landscape look like these days? What is the temper of the times? In my opinion, when I look around, what I notice is that there's a tone that predominates and that touches everything and that colors everything. That's the predominant feature of this context. And I've observed that it's a tone of sneering sarcasm and schoolyard brawling. In fact, sneering sarcasm seems that for the moment to have become a substitute for an intelligent argument. Well, if we take this analysis a little further, it seems that tone has two main objectives. The first objective is to manipulate you, and the second objective is to dominate. In other words, words are serving either for subterfuge or force, and therefore, as readers and listeners, unfortunately, more frequently than we'd like, we're either being gaslighted or we're being bludgeoned to death. And it is on that problematic ground that we need to maneuver. That's the lay of the land. So we're speaking to a bunch of people on problematic ground. It is obvious that as believers, we cannot be perpetrators. We cannot engage in this. But it seems to me equally true, and perhaps not as obvious, that we should not be victims of it either. How then should we handle this nitroglycerin? How then do we handle the explosives? What posture should we assume as communicators in an adversarial and an unfriendly world? Now, this applies to attorneys, but I think it applies to all of us. I think all of us operate in a world that's not necessarily that friendly to us, in our professions, in our personal lives. And how can we wisely maneuver in that world? My mother would often say something to me that I think describes the posture very well. She would say to me in her native French, ni victime, ni bourreau. Be neither a victim nor a bully. She would say this as I swung wildly when I was a young woman between being a hand-wringing maiden and a terrifying goon. As a young woman, I just couldn't decide whether I was Rapunzel or whether I was Raging Bull. I just couldn't figure it out. And in hindsight, her words remind me of Polonius's advice to Laertes: beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. So therefore, the posture, the safest, the wisest posture, in my opinion, is a posture which is standing on a narrow path. Again, it brings me back to the Gospels, where we're told that narrow is the path that leads to life. So it's not only a narrow, I suppose it's a narrow path in all sorts of contexts, and in the communications context in particular. To me, there are four things that need to occupy our minds as we set about communicating. The first is knowing our role in the situation and boldly asserting that role. The second is preparation. The third is being forthright and clear in our communications. And the fourth is silence. It's learning to be quiet. The first one, know your role and boldly assert it. You have to know who you are in a communication situation. In other words, you have to find the "you are here" X on the map of that situation. Who are you? Are you an advocate? Are you an adversary? Are you an observer? Are you a mediator? Are you counsel? Know your role and the duties of your role. The way I usually think through this myself is whenever I enter, whether it's a courtroom or a conference room or a negotiation, I ask myself, what is my duty here? What's the object of my being here? Once I can answer that question, I'll know whether I have a speaking part in the situation or not. Now, and when duty or position demand, we must speak. In Proverbs 24:11 through 12, we hear, rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but I knew nothing of this, does not he who weighs the hearts perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? So we cannot shirk our duty. We cannot say, this situation, I don't want to touch it. Once we have a duty to assert ourselves there, we must do it. But by the same token, if it's not our place to speak, we have to make sure that we stay silent, because God calls people who meddle in other people's affairs busybodies. And there's a series of verses about meddlers and busybodies and people who interfere in other people's quarrels. And one thing that really struck me is in the gospel, when the Lord, in Luke 12:13, a man cries out to Jesus and says to him, Lord, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. I'm paraphrasing. And the Lord says, man, who appointed me arbiter between you? And it really struck me that the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, decides this is not something that I'm supposed to be involved in right at this moment. And so he held his peace. But there's a particular story, and it appears in Acts 29 through 41, that I find is a really wonderful example of what I mean by knowing your duty and assuming the responsibilities of that duty and speaking forthrightly. It is Paul, of course, was in Ephesus and doing what he normally does everywhere he goes. He was stirring up trouble. And he ran afoul of the idol makers of Artemis, because he was telling them very plainly, well, if a man is making the god, it's not a god. If you're making it, it's not a god. So the people who constructed and built the idols didn't like this because it was going to interfere with business. And there was one person in particular who didn't like it and started to create quite an uproar. And people flooded into the theater. And from there, I'm going to start reading the story to you. Soon the whole city was in an uproar. The people seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia, and all of them rushed into the theater together. Paul wanted to appear before the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of Paul, sent him a message begging him not to venture into the theater. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. The city clerk, and this is the guy, the city clerk quieted the crowd and said, "Fellow Ephesians, doesn't all the world know that the city of Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of her image, which fell from heaven? Therefore, since these facts are undeniable, you ought to calm down and not do anything rash. You have brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed the goddess. If then Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a grievance against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. They can press charges. If there is anything further you want to bring up, it must be settled in a legal assembly. As it is, we are in danger of being charged with rioting because of what happened today. In any case, we would not be able to account for this commotion, since there is no reason for this." And after he said this, he dismissed the assembly. So I was hearing Chuck, who just spoke, was leading a church in New York of which I was a member at the time, and he was talking about Paul's involvement in Ephesus. But the only part I kept going back to, and the only part I felt really to focus on, was this city clerk. And I felt as if the Lord was saying, that's what I expect of you as you go through your public work. You do what needs to be done to keep things in order and to keep things flowing smoothly, to prevent things from blowing out of proportion whenever it's in your power to do that. And so again, it's knowing your duty and assuming that duty and asserting it. The next thing that we have to keep in mind when we're communicating is preparation. Now, we're going to the book of Nehemiah for this story. Now, this is one of my favorite books, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book for those of you who might not know. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king, and he was an exile from Jerusalem, and he heard someone told him that the walls of the city were down and that it was just a disaster. And he was brokenhearted, much like we are as New Yorkers when we see our city in a difficult circumstance. He was brokenhearted, and he fasted and he prayed and he put himself before the Lord, and he asked the Lord, he confessed the sins, and he asked the Lord to give him power to do something in this situation. And then he waits. And now I'm going to go to the part in the story where he goes before the king. "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. And now I had not been beforetime sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very afraid. And I said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lies waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? And then Nehemiah says, this is the key part. And so I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant has found favor in thy sight, that you would send me to Judah unto my city, to the city of my father's sepulchres, that I might build it. And the king said to me, when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. And then Nehemiah says, moreover, I said unto the king, this is the second part I want us to remember that we'll discuss after. If it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. And a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, was given to me. Now, and the rest of the story is that Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem, finally builds the wall after a tremendous amount of hardship. It's a remarkable book. It's the leadership book in the Bible, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about Nehemiah's exchange with this king and how he handled the communication and what preparation he did. First, we saw that he prayed and he fasted and he prepared himself and he adjusted his mind and put himself before God to prepare the way for him, knowing that he was a person, that was the person to whom he was accountable. But he does two remarkable things during his encounter with the king that have always very much struck me. The first one is, in the middle of his conversation with the king, it says, when the king says to him, what are you asking me for? He says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. So here is a man, he's in the middle of a life and death encounter with the king, an encounter that will either get him everything he needs or lose everything for him. But he, in that moment, is communicating with the Father and saying, and he doesn't tell us what he says, but he's putting himself in his presence. And so when people say to you, when you're having a communication and you say, I'm going to pray, it's two lines of communication are open. As believers, we're always have a line open with the Lord. We might be communicating with a human being, but we're always in a line of communication with the Lord. And that's something that I do on a frequent basis. And as I pray, as I speak to someone, what are the words that I should use? What's going on here? How should I approach this situation? And that's something that we need to think about and we need to have as our own as we prepare. We are preparing even as we speak. And the second part, which I love, is when he says, after the king says, okay, that's good, I'll let you go. When are you going? Then Nehemiah says, by the way, king, now that I'm going there, this is the other stuff I need, which I love. So this is a person who took the opportunity, had prepared beforehand what he was going to need. He needed letters of transit, he needed timber to build the wall, he needed all of this other stuff, and he had it and he was able to present it to the king because he might not have another opportunity to tell the king what he needed. And at that very moment, he got what he needed. So this shows us the level of preparation that we should have. The preparation starts before we get anywhere near the other person. If we have an important communication to make, we're praying about it. And Chuck was talking about fasting, or if it's not a fasting situation, but we're praying about it. In the midst of the communication, we're still aware of the fact that we can call down the help of the Lord as we're speaking to someone. And something just came to my spirit. We never know, because we don't know everything about our interlocutor. We don't know everything about that person. So we don't know which words would set them off in a wrong direction or get them to do or help them to convince them to give us what we need. So we need the help of the Holy Spirit to reveal that to us. And then the other point of preparation is to, once you have the floor, present all of your needs and say everything that you need, and in order to obtain what you need to get done what you need to get done. The third part, so we went through know your role and step into your role. Prepare when you know what you're going to have to do in this role as an advocate or counsel or I don't know, a parent. anyone in that situation. So know your role, prepare the role. Then once you're speaking, much like Nehemiah did and much like the city clerk did, they all had this quality, but I like this quality in Mordecai the best. You should speak as forthrightly and as plainly as you can. And I think for me, this is connected to, you can extrapolate from when the Lord says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I mean, that's a statement that's made in another context, but I think it's applicable here as well. As simply and as plainly as you can make a statement, I think it's critical for you to do that. Now let's go to the book of Esther. And we're encountering, and just for you to know, Esther became queen of Persia. Through a lot of ins and outs and back and forth, she became queen of Persia. And the person who inspired her and encouraged her in her endeavors was Mordecai, her uncle, who raised her. And in this country of Persia, there was a man named Haman who did not like the Jewish people and determined to have them destroyed. And so by subterfuge, he got the king to issue a decree for the destruction of all of the Jews in every province of Persia. And of course, because they posted these decrees and Mordecai read it, and he appears in the outer courts of the palace. And this is where we find him. When I'm reading Esther, chapter 4 through 15. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her, and told him to instruct her to go to the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther that what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to the royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. This story is so remarkable to me. And Mordecai's position here is, I wonder, isn't it Mordecai to a certain extent who had as much of a role in saving the Jewish people as Esther did? It was Mordecai's refusal to accept that no in this circumstance. It was Mordecai's putting the language in as stark a fashion as possible that led Esther to go to the king at the risk of her life. So and this tells me that when we do have something to say, it's not for us to go round in circles and beat about the bush. It's for us in love, but in forthrightness, to say exactly what we're thinking in that particular situation, because we might, as Esther did, and as the city clerk did, save a situation or prevent a harm by making clear the dangers of that situation. Now, I have a little story, a personal anecdote to tell about the Mordecai situation. I've read this book of the Bible many, many times because, of course, I wanted to be Esther. Of course, I wanted to be the pretty girl. I wanted to wear the crown. I wanted to be the queen. So I continued reading Esther. And as I got older, in fact, as I got older and I kept reading the book, I was like, oh God, look at this, look at Esther. And he was like, no, you're not Esther. You're Mordecai. I want you to be Mordecai. I was furious. I was like, you want me to be the guy with the, I can be the queen, but you want me to be the guy with the beard. And so that caused a little tiff between us, but I've gotten over it since. And I've made my peace with Mordecai, love the whole Mordecai position. And the last is silence. And I'm going to, for this illustration, I'm going to talk about the Shunamite woman. And you'll notice, and this is something that I've noticed, at least for me, some of the characters in the Bible who've had the greatest impact on me are the people who have no name and the people who kind of just show up and say something that changes the direction of the story. It's not always the big heroes. And this Shunamite woman, whom many people don't really think about or know about, is really one of my heroes. She demonstrates the type of character that I would like to have. She demonstrates the type of force that I would like to have. And she demonstrated it more than anything else by her silence. And we're going to learn this story together. Now, just to give you a little background on this story, the Shunamite woman was a very powerful and wealthy woman who lived in a particular region that Elisha, the prophet Elisha, visited often. And she was a very devout woman. And what she did is she constructed a room in her house for Elisha to stay whenever he was in town. And so one day, after accepting her hospitality for an extended period of time, Elisha asks his servant, what can we do for this woman? And so he has his servant call the Shunamite woman and say to her, would you like us to talk to the king for you? Would you like us to talk to this other big official for you? But she was like, no, thanks. I've got everything I need. I'm good. And so she left. But Elisha was insistent, and he spoke to Gehazi and he said, there's got to be something we can do for her. And Gehazi said, you know something? She has no children and her husband is already well on in years. So Elisha had her called back and he said, this time next year, you'll be holding a son. And she said, don't kid me. Don't play with me. Don't deceive me. He's like, no, you'll be holding a son. And lo and behold, she did. And that's where we are in the story. And the woman conceived and bare a son at the season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said to his father, my head, my head. And the father said to the lad, carry him to his mother. Of course. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees until noon, and then he died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door upon him, and went out. And she called unto her husband, and said, send me, I pray thee, to the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God, and come again. And he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. Then she saddled an ass and said to her servant, drive and go forward, slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. And so she went to the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he sent his servant Gehazi to her. Behold, yonder is that Shunamite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to thrust her away, and the man of God said, let her alone. Her soul is vexed within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me. Then she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? And the rest of this, and then, so what happens is that then first Gehazi goes and tries to raise the son, doesn't work. Then Elisha goes and tries to raise the son. And after some back and forth, the son is raised. He presents the son to the Shunamite woman. And what I find so remarkable in this story, I'm going to point them out to you, is that after he dies, the very next verse is, and she went up and laid him on the bed. Now, this is a mother who cherished this child, and she contained herself to such an extent that she put the child on the bed. She already had her plan. She put the child on the bed. She didn't run around the house to say anything to anyone else, because she held out hope that the child could be raised. She held out hope that she could accomplish something in that situation. So she did not dissipate herself in a lot of talking. She just took the child, put him on Elisha's bed, went to her husband, and started handling business. I need a young man and a donkey to get me to the man of God. And he's talking, right? Like, what do you need to do that for? It's not Sabbath, it's not the new moon, blah, blah, blah. And all she says is, it is well. She gets her donkey. She's on the donkey, and she says to the young man, ride on, don't stop unless I tell you. Elisha sees her far off, and he sends Gehazi to meet her. And Gehazi's asking questions. Is it you? Are you okay? Your husband, your son? She says, is it well? It is well. And then it's only when she gets to Elisha that she says what's on her heart. She grabs hold of his legs and she says, did I not tell you to deceive me? And then she tells him what the situation is. And then her son is saved. So it's fascinating to me to have that kind of control over yourself, that kind of control over your words, that kind of control, that kind of focus, to think, my husband can't help me in this situation. The servants can't help me in this situation. If this is going to be fixed, the only one who can fix it is Elisha. And to save herself and to focus herself to do that. So that silence, I think, is what the power was in this case that allowed her to focus and get what she wanted from Elisha at that time. And so the moral of the story here is that talking is not always a substitute for handling business. And that's something that we have to think about when we communicate as well. Sometimes silence is communication. And I'm going to take you, in addition to this woman's example, I'm going to take you to the Lord himself. When I was doing some looking around, I was interested to see that not too infrequently, one sees the words, and he remained silent, and he did not answer, in scriptures referring to Christ. It seems to me that silence and restraint are indications, even proofs, perhaps, of power, of authority, and of self-mastery. One is saying essentially to the interlocutor, you're inviting me down a road that suits you, or a situation. You can tell that to a situation, like the death of a person. You're inviting me down a road, but I'm choosing not to go down that road. I am choosing to exercise my agency and not go down that road. Now that is power, not being drawn out when one does not purpose to be drawn out, not answering the question that one does not purpose not to answer. And it makes me think very much of Proverbs 16:32 that says that the man who rules his spirit is better than the man who captures a city. And if nothing else, this kind of maintenance of silence is ruling your spirit. So we see, so to go back to the beginning, the mind is really the effective tool here. So the main thing in communication is the mind, is thinking. That's like the first thing that we have to do. And thinking in this fashion, what's my role here? Am I prepared? What do I have to do to prepare? How can I say this forthrightly? And to what extent must I speak? What are the things I need to say? What are the things that I shouldn't say? And so when one thinks about communication, so when I got to the end of all of this and I was thinking about communication and what was required to be an effective communicator, I came to a rather surprising conclusion. Humility in all of this is the most needful posture in this context. After you think this through, you have to have the humility to execute this. And when I say humility, I'm thinking of Tim Keller's brilliant definition of it, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. From my observations, humility is the only thing that gives one the broad enough scope to operate effectively. If one is humble, one is not hampered by questions of how do I look while I'm saying this? What are people thinking while I'm saying this? One is able to focus on the thing that one is supposed to do, on the issue at hand, and not on oneself. And so because communication is not about sounding smart, it's about getting across the intended point. It's important that we own the experience of communicating because it is a blessed one. And I thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Olga. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
And I'm so appreciative of the way that God spoke through you in that time. So I would love to invite our attendees, our guests, to chime in with questions. You can put them in the question and answer box. And Olga has graciously agreed to have people be able to ask them on screen if they'd like to. So I'm going to invite folks to go ahead and type your questions in, and then as I see questions come in, I'll send you a message and say, would you like to ask your question directly? And then I'll pop you on to the screen so you can ask directly. And I see a question starting to come in. So one person asks if there will be a recording available. And yes, there will be a recording available, and we will definitely share that with everyone, and that will be on the Christian Union website. She also asks if an outline will be available.
I can do that. I don't have one yet, but I can do that if that's okay with you guys.
I think that would be fine if you'd like to share with us. We can share it with other folks. So if there are other questions, I'd love to have you type them into the Q&A box. We're standing back in awe of the Holy Spirit and the way God spoke through you. So.
Olga, while we wait for a couple questions to roll in, would you mind sharing a bit of your testimony as far as your calling? How did you get called by the Lord? Or, we'd say by the Lord, but how did you get called into the line of work that you are doing?
Well, both my parents, I've lost my mother this year and my father's not well, but both my parents were attorneys in Haiti. And they were forced out of Haiti under the dictatorship of Papa-Doc Duvalier, who was a violent dictator in the 50s and 60s. And they were forced out of Haiti. And when we came to this country, and I was actually born here. So my mother was pregnant when they fled for their lives, basically, because Duvalier was busy ridding the country of lawyers and doctors and the entire middle class so that he could consolidate power. And I was born here. And I remember, I mean, what some of the first memories I have are of my parents talking about the rule of law. It was, and always drawing a contrast for me between nations where a person is the law, and where a nation where the law is the law and the law predominates. And this constant kind of emphasis on this. And I remember it really started to take shape, and this is kind of funny. I was a little kid, and do you remember the Watergate hearings? They would always interrupt Sesame Street and Electric Company and the stuff I was watching on Channel 13 when I was a little kid. And I was furious. And my father had explained to me, he's like, no, look, and I never forget this. I was like a really little kid. And he said, look at this. The President of the United States is being called to account for actions that he took. Even the president is not above the law here. And I was still mad that I wasn't watching my program, but somehow that sunk into my mind. And so that became the impetus for me. You know, I was interested in law from high school, college, etc. It's just, it was always that. It was law or being a dancer. So law won out.
I did not know that about you.
Yeah.
So Olga, Danielle wrote something interesting in the chat box, so I invited her on to
wonderful.
Share it with you so you could respond to it. It's sort of less a question and more a comment, but something I think you could respond to.
Okay. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Olga. This was just wonderful. I'm the one who asked for the outline.
Oh, thank you.
I kept thinking, I can't write this fast. I was just reflecting that this is the opposite of I'm an appellate litigator in Connecticut.
Yes.
I was a trial litigator before I moved to doing exclusively appeals. And this is the opposite of what you're taught in law school and even what you're taught in firms. When you're mooted, you're always told to try to get in as much as you can, especially in the appellate context where you know you're going to be interrupted with questions. But I have always thought that that's not the most effective thing to do because it does not engender confidence at all. And also, when the judges ask questions, it's because either they want to know for forming their own opinion, or they're looking for you to make a point that's relevant to one of their colleagues on the bench. And so I think it's really helpful to take those cues and to welcome them, to stop a moment and to listen. And it also, I think, engenders trust when you're a little bit humble before the court, because it shows the court that you respect their authority in the situation and you're not trying to usurp it. And, I just was reflecting on other major speakers in the Bible as you were talking, and I was thinking, well, about Moses. He certainly came from a background that would have created tremendous confidence, being from a ruling family, but coming back with a stutter and being mute sort of forced humbleness on him. And I was thinking about Samson, who certainly was not humble in the beginning at all, but it was when God humbled him that he had the greatest death count, if you will. Anyway, this has really just given me a lot to think about. And thank you so much for your thoughtful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Did you have a question also, or?
Oh no, Christine just asked if I would share the comment. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I think I like that attitude because the only thing a lawyer has is their reputation, right? So as a clerk, I would get papers, I'm not going to say the name, from a particular firm. And I was so happy when I got those papers because I was like, I'm going to read these papers and every case they cite is actually going to be cited for the proposition they're stating, etc. Oh, I'm so happy. Then I would get papers from another firm and I would be like, oh brother, I'm going to have to read every single one of these cases. I can't believe a word these people are saying. They're always interrupting people. It doesn't work. It's not effective. And I agree with you that humility does give you that scope, because what humility does, it allows you to listen when you're not listening to the other person and you're missing the cues, and you can't be as effective as you would be if you were listening. So I agree with you.
Thanks, Danielle. I'm going to pop someone else onto the screen now. Okay, here comes Stamenka. Hopefully, taking a moment longer than I expected. There she comes. There you are.
Hi, Stamenka, you're on mute.
That's right. Thank you so much. I enjoyed this talk, and I'm not a lawyer or a professional in that field, but I was just wondering, I know you're inspired by many characters in the Bible, but
Yes.
who is the lawyer or the judge that has inspired you the most, and why? You can share that with us.
The lawyer or the judge who's inspired me the most. I really like Benjamin N. Cardozo, who was a New York judge. And I love his writing because it's so short. I mean, he like for every judge who writes a 50-page opinion, I call it the surgical strike decision. It's like he established so many principles that we still follow today. He established so many of the precedents, but his decisions were these fluid, beautiful little things written so lucidly. So this was not a judge who was trying to, I'm a judge, look at my words. You know, they take their 4 pages long. This is a person who was thinking through a problem, found the solution, and wanted to make it clear to everyone who was reading the decision. So a person who is not an attorney can read a Cardozo decision and know what the judge is saying. So he's the judge who he really inspired me in terms of the thinking, in terms of how to approach things and how to think them through. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there are a couple of folks who have questions that are that they'd prefer to have me ask for them. So I'm going to go ahead and ask them. So one person asks, can you share an example of a situation as a lawyer where you had to speak into a difficult situation and you saw God work?
I have to say, lately during this pandemic, it's pretty much been almost every conversation, because everything is so fraught and people are on edge and everything is so difficult and the decisions that have to be made are so challenging. And so I've seen what I've seen personally is turning down the temperature in the room. And what I mean by that is everyone's agitated, right? We're working from home, we're frustrated, people have lost people, stuff has happened. And to go in there and to dial down the volume and to try to focus on the topic and not on the person. So very frequently when I'm in one of those situations, I feel, okay, what is it that I'm actually talking about here? I always have to go back to the point, because like all of us, I tend to just start thinking, oh my God, I'm really upset with this, or I'm really upset with this, or this person's really getting on my nerves. But I try not to follow that rabbit hole. I try to wait a minute, let's get back here. What are we talking about? What's the issue? And it's this, I find that it's like always bringing my brain back to where it needs to be, instead of thinking about boy, I'd like to tell them to shut up, or boy, I'd like to, and just to bring it back. So I've seen God work in terms of calming myself down and bringing the temperature down in other situations also.
Terrific. That is a helpful answer, and I think something for us all to sort of channel in our own lives. How do we bring down the temperature of the situation? So.
I once heard, there was a pastor, I don't know who said it, I don't remember, but I never forgot it. Don't be a thermometer, be a thermostat. So don't walk into the room and absorb that and tell and reveal what the temperature is in the room. Bring it down, control the temperature. You walk in and you bring down the temperature. So I always liked that.
I'm curious, as a follow-up to that, is there a way that you call upon God to help you do that? Is that prayer in advance of walking into the room, or is it something that you do as you're, are you sort of calling on God to change you in that moment?
I do. I'm like prayer before, prayer during. I'm just like, I belong to the Nehemiah school of prayer. I'm like, it's just like never too much, right?
Yeah.
So, but of course you can't say, which I love, which the Bible shows, you can't say, wait a minute, I'll be right back, I'm going to go pray. You kind of have to be right there in the moment using that channel.
Yeah.
I often find myself asking, when I'm in a room and stuff is getting difficult, I say, show me what the real issue is. Show me what the real problem is here. Reveal that to me, because, some people don't tell you what the real problem is. And so all this stuff is going on, but there's this unspoken problem. And so I often say, show me what the issue is. Show me what the problem is. Where's the knot here? So.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, another question. How does one respond to the context or spirit of sarcasm that you mentioned in your talk?
The way, in my personal experience, it's when someone asks me those rhetorical questions where it's not really a question, where they're just trying to bludgeon me, I say, well, when you have an actual question to ask me, I'll be happy to answer it. But I'm not going to engage in this, because you just want to make a point, and you've made your point, but this is not an exchange. This is just you wanting to make your point. When you have an actual question for me, I'll be happy to answer it. So I've just chosen, I don't answer those questions. Someone comes at me like that, because that's not an exchange. That's a fist fight, basically. That's just, a fist fight with words. And I used to do that stuff, but I try not to do that anymore.
Well, and it's so unfortunate, because that seems to be so much of what passes for conversation now, is
Yes.
fight with words. So
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another question to ask. So in our pre-event for our Cornerstone partners, we had an earlier event, and you talked a little bit about process versus emotion. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays out for you, how you focus on process versus emotion in legal situations, and how you integrate your faith into those situations?
Well, I've been practicing for a long time, so I've kind of gotten used to the fact that this is not about me. This is something I kind of say to myself on a pretty regular basis. This is not about me. This is not about how you're feeling. This is about this thing. Now, I get very strong feelings about one thing or another. But at the end of the day, I try to do the reasonable thing. And even if I try to push my point of view, I'm open to someone saying, something that's really not reasonable. This is the better way to go. And there was another question during the Cornerstone part about fellowship and community. I find that by bringing my questions to a community, I really head that stuff off at the pass. I have a few colleagues that I really rely on, whom I really respect. And so when I can feel myself going off, I call that person or those people and I say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? So, and I can kind of, soften those rough edges that way. But again, it's extracting yourself from the thing personally.
It reminds me of the piece that you said in the talk about, I'm not the king or the queen.
Yes.
That it's like when you remove yourself from being the center of that piece, then you're able to separate yourself from the emotion of the situation.
Yes. I think lawyers have a very interesting job, whether they're practicing attorneys or whether they're judges. If you think about it, in neither one of these things can you really be yourself. You're either speaking for someone or you're determining a matter based in the law. neither, you're not an actress or an actor or a musician. You're not like giving all of yourself. This is not, it's about a process going on in your brain and bringing that to bear. It's something to learn. I remember just a short war story. I was a very, very new attorney. It was my first job. And I was going to court maybe the second or third time. And I was wearing a very, very plain outfit. And I usually don't wear very plain outfits, but I wore one to go to court. And a colleague of mine then, well, why don't you wear what you normally wear? You wear those scarves and those necklaces and all these doodads. And I said, and it's so interesting, it was the Holy Spirit said, but I'm not going there to represent myself. I'm going there to represent the entity. So I have to dress in a way that's not going to be offensive to the person who's going to be judging the entity. I can't go there to express myself. That's not my job there. So, and that was as a young lawyer, I didn't fully understand the ramifications of that, but I remember that.
So I have one more question, which may indeed be our last one, just depending on the timing. And it's a meaty question. I think it's at the heart of so much for all of us now, which is with things having gotten so dangerously political and divided, what do you see as a path forward for America to find or settle on truth? And how can Christians play a role in that?
That's a really great question. The first thing is, again, wisdom. How you play, choosing your moment, choosing your time. It's very difficult to say, run out into the street and tell everybody your opinions. No, there's a time and a place for everything. And one of the things I would recommend that you study people like Daniel, and study people who were believers, but who were operating in a secular or hostile environment, right? So these people nonetheless met with success. They were excellent at what they did with the secular authorities, but they were true to their beliefs. And one of the things that's interesting about Daniel is, he put himself in danger by praying, but he didn't run around beating a drum saying, look at me, I'm praying. He just was doing what he needed to do. And at the moment when that situation came to a head, he handled it at that moment. And what I would recommend to people is to know the distinction between running ahead of things and waiting for the moment where you have to take a stand, or where you must make your beliefs known or lie. That's something that's a wisdom thing. That's a maturity thing. To not throw yourself into it, but to wait, and for that moment, and then to be forthright in that moment.
Well, and that's so much of what I hear you saying is talking about the growth that you've had in yourself over the career that you've had, and also the growth over your journey as a Christian.
Yes.
And about how God works in us to teach us that maturity as we're moving along, to sort of figure out the right moment to speak out, and the moments to hold back and stay quiet because the moment has not yet arrived yet.
Exactly. Or it's not that moment. And to have that wisdom, and to really, one of the things I've learned over the years in my walk is that it's not a one size fits all with God. It's almost as if he's speaking to you individually, moment by moment. It's not like if he tells you something on Tuesday, then you must do this thing on Wednesday. No, it's like he told you this on Tuesday at this time. This is what you need to do. On Wednesday, it might be something else. And to be open and to be really attentive to the word, to the Spirit, and to be attentive to people, and to be attentive to situations, to know what you should do in a particular moment. And I think that forthrightness and respect are what we can use. Those two things, forthrightness and respect, are what we can use to bring things forward. That's what I would say.
That's beautiful.
Wow. Thank you so much, Olga. I know that personally I have been challenged and stretched, and I probably speak for most everyone, if not all of us, on this call tonight. So thank you for your insight, for your wisdom that we can glean from you, that you have learned through these years in walking with the Lord and using the intellect that he's given you, the skill, the experience, the passion that he's given you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And thank you for the time that you've put into this. Much thought, for sure. I see a comment coming in. Christine, I'll let you decide if you want to jump in here with the comment, but just want to express our gratitude to you. And you are someone, Olga, I think you know well that I have admired you for quite some time. And
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know Olga personally, I hope you get the opportunity. She's not only incredibly wise and generous in heart and thought, but she's just also a tremendous friend and a faithful sister in the Lord. So we are grateful for you at Christian Union. I'm grateful for you personally. And thank you all for your time. I'll close us out in prayer unless, Christine, did you want, oh, it's Ellie.
Can I just read the comment because it's beautiful?
It's from Ellie Ellsworth.
She says, I am very moved, Olga, that you have found a way to apply your faith in your work by the integrity of the gospel, and that you show the beauty and grace of your salvation as you go along. It rings true and it inspires. Thank you, Lord, for Olga.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I echo that. I mean, it was a powerful evening, both our pre-event and this one, and we're just so very grateful for you sharing your faithfulness and your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Amen. And I'll close us out in prayer. And thank you all so much for giving of your time this evening. Thank you for joining us. And let's pray as we close out the evening. Lord, we bless you. Jesus, you are King. You are the perfectly wise one. And we thank you, God, for the ways that you have taught Olga through the years. And Holy Spirit, we thank you for this message that you've brought to us. And I pray, God, that we would take this, that I would take this, we would take this and use this wisdom, use this knowledge and this skill in our communications moving forward, that we can be powerful and effective and step into the right moments for such a time as this. Lord, these are difficult times, and we know that you have chosen us to live in this time, as you did Esther, for such a time as this. So lead our tongues, our hearts, our minds to live for you and to follow your spirit. And we bless Olga in Jesus' name. Thank you, God, for her and all of her time and work. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. And don't forget to go to dayandnight.org and join us for the upcoming fast in January. Good night.
Good night.
Be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you,
too.
Olga. Good night.
Good night.